Fort Devens, Massachusetts, September 1945. Dawn crept across the New England woods like light slipping beneath a frozen door, thin and silver and careful not to wake the world too quickly. Rain had fallen through the night, leaving the air sharp with pine sap and wet metal. Along a narrow dirt road, a convoy of olive-drab trucks growled through the mist, their headlights slicing pale tunnels through puddles and fog. Inside those trucks sat men who had once commanded armies, men who had ordered artillery barrages and signed maps that sent thousands to die. Now they sat shoulder to shoulder on wooden benches, gripping their knees like nervous recruits, wrapped in rough blankets that slid from their shoulders with every jolt. They wore no chains, no handcuffs, only silence, and the certainty they had been teaching themselves for months. This was the day it would end. Somewhere beyond these woods, they believed, waited a firing squad, or a rope, or a shallow pit dressed up as paperwork. Rumors had hardened into expectation. The victors would make examples of them. History demanded blood. General Wolfram Crosk sat closest to the canvas flap, counting the seconds the way he once counted artillery intervals. His spectacles fogged with the breath of too many men sealed into one space. Beside him, General Manteuffel murmured, not quite to anyone, "They'll separate us first." There was no fear in his voice, only exhaustion. Crosk touched the empty place on his collar where medals once hung and imagined the final command. Present arms, fire. Rain drummed harder on the canvas as the trucks crossed a narrow bridge. From outside came the bark of an American sergeant, steady and musical. "Keep it tight. 2 more miles." The accent hurt more than an insult could have. These voices were not cruel. They were confident, controlled. And that frightened them most. Then the forest fell away. Pines gave way to a clearing, and through the gray curtain of rain appeared neat rows of wooden buildings painted fresh white, barbed wire strung clean and new around their edges. A water tower rose behind them, stenciled with simple blue letters, U.S. Army. Fort Devens stood quiet and orderly, rifles resting loosely on guard shoulders, not raised, not threatening. When the truck stopped, steam rose from the hoods in pale ghosts. A lieutenant in a rubber poncho approached, clipboard tucked beneath oilcloth. "Welcome to Massachusetts, gentlemen," he said evenly. "You'll be processed inside. Then warm beds and breakfast." Breakfast. The tailgate dropped. Wet pine rushed into the truck. For a moment no one moved. Habit said trap. Curiosity whispered miracle. Finally Crosk climbed down, his boots splashing into muddy water. He stared at his reflection, a blurred gray ghost, then at windows glowing softly with light. One door opened and released a triangle of yellow warmth and the unmistakable smell of brewed coffee. A young American soldier waited there, hardly more than a boy. Without drawing his weapon, he gestured inside. "Right this way, sir." "Sir." Inside, warmth closed around them. Tin stoves glowed red. Floors shone with fresh varnish. Tables were already set with enamel cups half filled with steaming coffee, real coffee, not the bitter substitutes of wartime. No shouting. No cameras. No pit disguised as paperwork. Only order, restraint, and silence. Crosk wrapped his hands around the mug to stop them shaking. "If this is death," he whispered, "it's very well rehearsed." Manteuffel listened to the rain soften on the roof. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "it's life." Weeks earlier, their journey had begun in Liverpool, where British officers handed them over beside crates marked Lend-Lease. They had boarded a Liberty ship, expecting never to see land again. 13 days of fog and rumor followed, every wave against the hull sounding like the final sentence of a verdict. When the American coast finally rose through the mist, cranes and bridges standing unbroken, Disbelief cut through them. This, then, was the enemy's world, intact, humming, abundant. Fort Devens lay 40 miles inland, chosen not for drama but for quiet. Farmers tipped their hats as the trucks passed. No one threw stones. Colonel Robert Greene, the camp commander, read his orders twice. Maintain discipline. Demonstrate decency. No exceptions. Registration followed with calm efficiency. Watches, pens, notebooks emptied onto canvas trays. Fingerprints inked. Photographs taken. A sergeant joked they processed generals faster than mules and was promptly scolded. The barracks were clean, curtained, warmed. A recreation hut held Red Cross books, Shakespeare in German, copies of Time magazine. From his window, Krosk watched soldiers hanging laundry and wrote in his diary, "They defeat us not by rage, but routine. Their normality frightens me." Days passed. Medical inspections came and went. Young medics listened to hearts that once wore iron crosses. A nurse named Martha Keenan offered Mantifull a blanket and told him his blood pressure was better than half their recruits. He stared at the blue letters printed on the cloth, U.S. Army, as if the words themselves were impossible. Interrogations followed, but gently. Coffee and sweet rolls on the table. A former history teacher asked questions without threats. "You lost the war," he said simply. "But you can still win back a measure of honor by telling the truth." Letters arrived from Europe, burned at the edges, smelling of ash. A lieutenant delivered each one by hand. "We moved heaven to find these for you, sir." That word again. Sir. Kindness came not as spectacle, but repetition. Clean barracks. Warm meals. Polite guards. No trap ever sprang. In November, they shared a meal with the American staff. A private from Kansas carved turkey and joked he never thought he'd cook for generals. Laughter, careful but real, crossed the tables. That night Mantifull wrote, "We were prepared for their bullets, not their tolerance." In December, General Kerner died of a stroke. The Americans organized a funeral within a day. A jeep carried his coffin. A chaplain read Psalm 23 in 2 languages. A single volley cracked the air. Colonel Greene handed Krosk the folded cloth. "We honor him as a soldier," he said, "and we expect you to honor peace when you go home." From that day on, no one spoke of executions. Winter settled over Massachusetts, frosting the windows, slowing time into long reflection. In January, repatriation lists appeared. Uniforms were pressed. Diaries censored. Krosk packed the camp Bible and wrote inside it, "To remember our conqueror's restraint." On departure morning, the same trucks waited. Captain Morrison saluted. "Germany will need builders before soldiers." Mantifull answered softly, "In war, we were taught mercy is weakness." Morrison tipped his cap. "Sir, mercy is cheaper than bullets." Across the Atlantic again, Krosk stood at the rail holding the folded American flag, watching gray water curl against the hull. When they reached Bremerhaven, ruin and smoke greeted them. Civilians stared at officers who returned without arrogance. No execution waited. Only rebuilding. Years later, letters crossed the ocean. A Christmas card to an American chaplain. Anonymous donations to hospitals. Historians puzzled over what had happened at Fort Devens. No revelation, only small gestures, repeated patiently, until even defeated men learned a harder lesson than punishment could teach. Paper rosters burned in a barrel in April 1946, ash lifting into a blue sky. New recruits drilled where generals once waited for death. Most locals never knew what had been decided there. But the generals remembered. In memoirs, in councils, in the changed tone of Europe's rebuilding. Because in that quiet camp among the pines, they learned something their war had never taught them: that moral strength is not fury, not triumph, not revenge, but the refusal to become what you have defeated. And sometimes the greatest victory in war is not the enemy you destroy, but the humanity you manage to keep.